Ja ću stvarno krenuti. I will start because we don't have time for further delay. Pa ću ja početi iz razloga, this session will be part in English, part in Serbian. So I don't know, for those guests from abroad, I have to tell you that we are a unique population who can read both Latin and Cyrillic. So if you give someone who is from Serbia, he will read, even if it is in same text, Latin and Cyrillic on the same page. If you have even words on Latin or Cyrillic, so they go read just normally, like it is the same letter. So this is something which is very unique from the neuropsychological effect of Serbian. Tako da će ova sesija biti malo na srpskom, malo na engleskom. What we actually try to do is to have a slides for our colleagues on English, for those of us who will speak in Serbian, and for those who will speak only in English, of course, they will have also slides in English. So guys, I will now switch to Serbian, and I will give a presentation of our national data from our national survey.
So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our Professor Dr. Milica Pejović-Milovančević, who is going to talk to us about the results of the study of COVID to Seoul. So over to you, Milica.
Yes, thank you, Gordana. So I will talk about mental health disorder during the second year of COVID-19 pandemic in Serbia. These are the results of our national survey, and to be very honest with you, this is the only national survey which we have in this period in last 2 years. Znači, ovo je prikaz rezultata koji će, to je studija koja je, dobili smo Fonda za nauku i ona je urađena u, da kažem, u kolaboraciji između nas sa Medicinskog fakulteta u Beogradu, Filozofskog fakulteta u Novom Sadu i Filozofskog fakulteta u Beogradu. Kao što vidite na ovim slikama, nas je bilo 9, da kažem, istraživača koji su na neki način osmislili čitav ovaj program. A ciljevi našeg programa su bili, znači kada govorimo šta je to što smo želeli da prikažemo, to je da ispitamo koji je zdravstveni status populacije uzrasta od 18 do 65 godina, koji su naravno tokom pandemije bili izloženi i koja je to bila broj ljudi koji su bili izloženi u virusu, kao i kolika je bila stopa vakcinacije u Srbiji. Ono što smo isto želeli da uradimo ovom studijom, da procenimo koji su bili faktori i koja je bila frekvenca stresora kojem su ljudi u Srbiji bili izloženi tokom pandemije. Nakon toga želeli smo da utvrdimo i koje su to individualne karakteristike i koji su poremećaji, mentalni poremećaji tokom pandemije. Ono što je veoma važno da napomenem, da je ovo prva epidemiološka studija u Srbiji za koju možemo da kažemo da je metodološki veoma čisto urađena i govori o zapravo ne samo stanju mentalnog zdravlja tokom pandemije, s obzirom da je prva, govori i o mentalnom zdravlju naše nacije uopšte, znači prvi zvanični, da kažem tako, rezultati. I naravno ono što smo još volili da uradimo bila su pitanja vezana za prevalencu teorija zavere koje su vrlo popularne u našoj zemlji, da vidimo šta je to i zbog čega se ljudi ne vakcinišu, na primjer, ili zašto, kako Srbi vide, odnosno kako vidi naša populacija, nisu samo naravno Srbi, kakve su razlozi zbog kojih je došlo do pandemije, kakav je kvalitet života. Ono što će, pre nego što prođe, ja ću se samo skoncentrisati na adolescente, a vi ste mogli da dobijete rezultate naravno i na našem sajtu i preko različitih brošura. Znači, mi smo išli u 60 opština u Srbiji i ono što je bilo važno da smo angažovali 52 najviše lekara, zatim studenta master studija Filozofskog fakulteta u Beogradu i u Nišu. I oni svi su pre početka ove studije dobili edukaciju, jer ovo je bila studija vrata do vrata. Znači, mi smo napravili nacionalni reprezentativni uzorak i naši istraživači su išli vrata do vrata i sprovodili klinički intervju Znači, mi nismo imali online ankete, nego smo išli vrata do vrata, ulazili u kuće i onda nemojte da vas čudi ova slika da vidite ovog jednog našeg istraživača koja je čak ušla i u štalu, jer dok je radila mini, gospođa je muzla kravu i nije mogla da prekine, naravno, zbog našeg istraživanja, tako da je to jedan od kurioziteta. Ili su se, naravno, družili sa kućnim ljubimcima, tako da bilo je svakakih zanimljivih iskustava i ovde među nama sedi, evo, ja vidim Milicu Žugić koja je bila zapravo jedan od anketara. Koliko je na kraju naš uzorak bio? Znači, kada se sve dobro izanaliziralo, otprilike 1203 osobe je intervjuisano i obavljeni su rezultati na preko 1203 osobe. Kao što vidite, odnos između muškaraca i žena je upravo kao što je i u godišnjaku koji je izdat 2019. godine, a odnosi se na statistički godišnjak. Znači, to je ta prevalenca odnosa muškaraca-žena. U našoj populaciji, odnosno grupu koju ja danas ću najviše da obratim pažnju, to je adolescentni, odnosno kasni adolescentni uzrast od 18 do 25 godina i tu je bilo, kao što vidite, 141 osoba, otprilike 11,7% uzorka, od toga 51% su bile žene. Zanimljivo je da većina našeg uzorka su bile osobe sa srednjom školom, što je takođe negde u skladu sa godišnjakom i to je ono što nemamo razliku između ove starosne grupe i odrasle starosne grupe. Da kažem odrasle, tako ću reći. Kao što vidite, kada smo pitali sa kakvim su se sve, da kažemo, događajima tokom pandemije suočavali, u grupi adolescenata od 18 do 25 godina, otprilike četvrtina uzorka bila je bolesna ili je iskusila žalovanje zbog osobe ili neki stres zbog osobe koja je imala COVID-19. Otprilike petina uzorka je imala finansijske ili probleme vezane sa poslom, a najčešće je bilo u pitanju finansijska kriza zbog toga što su ostali nezaposleni ili im je bilo potrebno više meseci i su bili, da kažem, bez posla. Zatim, naravno, lični problemi koji su bili uzrokovani pojavom pandemije i, naravno, problemi u odnosima sa partnerima. Kada smo pitali šta je to, primenili smo jednu skalu, objavili smo 2 rada, jer smo prvo validizirali ovu skalu, to se zove COVID stres skala. U toj skali smo zapravo procenjivali od 0 do 4 kako oni vide da li postoji strah od zaraze ili da li je COVID-19 ima veze sa nekom vrstom ksenofobije, kakvi su socioekonomski strahovi i tako dalje. U svakom slučaju, na ovoj skali nismo našli da postoji razlika u COVID stres sindromu između odraslih i adolescenata, ali ono što negde možemo da kažemo da jedino na skali koja opisuje ksenofobiju, negde imamo da je ona bila nešto više kod mladih u odnosu na odraslu populaciju. Dalje smo procenjivali distres i negde smo imali jednu studiju s kojom smo mogli da poredimo ranije. Kao što vidite u studiji koja je objavljena 2014. godine, gde se na populaciji grupe od 18 i 25 godina bilo je značajno manje depresivnih sindroma te 2014. godine. Sada, kada smo procenjivali, a koristili smo PHQ, upitnik koji se najčešće koristi za ispitivanje depresivnih sindroma, u ovom istraživanju, nažalost, se primetilo da nema razlike između adolescenata i ostalog dela populacije, što bi ukazivalo da je onda u periodu od 2014. do 2021. odnosno 2022. kad smo radili ovo istraživanje, ipak nešto porasla depresivnost. Ovde zaista koristim priliku da kažem da ono što čitamo iz medija, 50% populacije mladih je depresivno, ne znam koliko njih pokušava suicid. To su sve spekulativne priče koje nisu bazirane na validnim istraživanjima. Da li su one dobijene online ili su dobijene samo na osnovu impresije. Naša iskustva, evo, kao što vidite na našem uzorku, nego srednja vrednost, otprilike srednju depresivnu osjećanja ima oko 4,1% našeg uzorka, a da kažemo u moderately severe, odnosno to se kaže umereno tešku, ima 1,5%. I to su podaci na nacionalnom reprezentativnom uzorku. Kada smo radili anksiozne simptome tokom pandemije, mi smo pronašli da u populaciji adolescenata i odraslih nema razlike, a kao što vidite, i to je za nas bilo najviše iznenađenje, jer smo očekivali da su anksiozni poremećaji veoma česti u našoj populaciji, kao što vidite, u ovoj studiji se pokazalo mereno instrumentom koji meri generalizovani anksiozni poremećaj i anksiozne simptome, kao što vidite, svega 1,8 generalno našeg uzorka je pokazivala anksiozne simptome i tu nema razlike između adolescenata i odraslih. Kada generalno govorimo o prevalenciji psihijatrijskih poremećaja u celom uzorku, vidimo da svaki 6. stanovnik naše zemlje, što bi, kada bi aproksimaciju pravilo, znači negde oko 700.000 adultne populacije u našoj zemlji, ispunjava kriterijume za jedan od 12 najčešćih mentalnih poremećaja. I kada govorimo de novo poremećaji, to su 8,4%, a rekurentni poremećaji 6,8%. U 2,8% ispitanika, što je kada aproksimaciju napravimo 120.000 stanovnika, pokazuje minimum nivo suicidalnosti i kao što vidite ta suicidalnost se kreće negde od 1,7 za blagu do 0,4% u opštoj populaciji. Kada se sada, i ovde vidite sve poremećaje, kada se fokusiramo samo na adolescentnu grupu od 18 do 25 godina, nema razlike u odnosu na celokupan uzorak kad je u pitanju poremećaj raspoloženja, anksioznost i drugi poremećaj. Ono što jesmo primetili da je viša prevalenca eksternalizovanih ponašanja, što se i očekuje kad su u pitanju adolescenti, a da je najčešći poremećaj, i to bih skrenula, i generalno u opštoj populaciji, a i kod adolescenata, to jeste zloupotreba supstance. I mi treba da se pitamo, čak ni na ovom kongresu mi nismo imali sesije koje su posvećene, prosto nemamo stručnjaka dovoljno stručnjaka koji se bavimo ovo i ja molim mlade, ja stalno propagiram, znači ovo je za našu populaciju najčešći mentalni poremećaj, bolesti, zavisnosti i upotreba alkohola. I to je isto i u populaciji mladih, znači 18,4% adolescenata u ovoj našoj grupi ispunjava kriterijum za poremećaj zbog upotrebe alkohola. I to je po meni najznačajniji rezultat ovog istraživanja. Pitali smo i o kvalitetu života i negde ono što je očekivano, i to je dobro, da kada smo pravili poređenje kvaliteta života između mladih i starih u okviru našeg uzorka, naravno da mladi ljudi, i to je optimizam za nas koji radimo sa mladima, opisuju i doživljavaju i bolje procenjuju svoj kvalitet života u odnosu na odrasle i tu je značajna razlika. Ono što je isto važno, da nismo pronašli vezu između kvaliteta života i eksternalizovanih poremećaja kad su u pitanju adolescenci. Sada malo tih zanimljivosti, ovaj rad uskoro će se objaviti, to su te teorije zavere kojima smo vrlo skloni, mi smo postavili 5 pitanja, otprilike pitanje Bill Gates je tvrdnji, Bill Gates je izazvao COVID, vakcinacija ne radi i tako dalje, onih tipičnih nekih 5 uverenja. I ono što smo došli da je, taj 600-stepena skala koja je ispitivanje, da je polovina našeg celokupnog uzorka veruje u konspirativne teorije, da je od toga da 20% kompletno se slaže sa svim ovim konspirativnim teorijama o razlogu kako je došao virus, kako se uvezao, koje već znate sve izvesti kako otprilike to ide, znači to je 20%, potpuno veruje u to, a oni koji su, kada smo sada te konspirativne teorije poredili, negde smo došli do zaključka da oni ljudi koji su vakcinisani su obično oni koji su stariji i koji ne veruju u konspirativne teorije, a nažalost ono što smo dobili, i to je veliko pitanje za sve nas ovde, da mladi ljudi koji naravno veruju u konspirativne teorije nisu bili vakcinisani i to su oni mladi ljudi koji dolaze više iz prigradskih naselja, velikih gradova i to je populacija sa srednjom i osnovnom školom. Kada sad sve ovo saberemo, želim da vam kažem nešto što isto je zabrinjavajuće. Vakcinaciju u našem uzorku 51% stanovnika Srbije je bilo vakcinisano u momentu kad smo radili istraživanje, a kada smo radili samo na grupi adolescenata, to je ispod 30% u grupi od 18 do 25 godina. O svemu ovome možete vidjeti na našem sajtu. Ovo je brošura koju smo delili tokom kongresa. Takođe, na našem sajtu imamo brojne Cov to Sol, tako se zove akronim našeg projekta. Možete da pronađete i mnogo više o svim ovim rezultatima, gde smo govorili šta je COVID stres i percepcija usamljenosti, prosto nije bilo vremena sve da vam se prikaže. Ovo su radovi koji su do sada objavljeni kada je u pitanju ovaj projekat i neki radovi su još u toku da se objave. Sve u svemu, želimo da kažemo da izgleda da pandemija nije imala tako snažan efekat na naše stanovništvo kao što se možda to očekivalo ili kao što su neki mediji prenosili. Ipak postoji više distresa nego što je očekivano i ono što smo isto videli da kako je pandemija trajala, tako se čini da je distres u Srbiji padao od pandemije. Mi smo adaptivni izgleda na različite stresore, nije tu Nenad, ali ja njega vrlo često citiram. On je rekao, nemamo mi nisku toleranciju na frustraciju, mi imamo poremećaj visoke tolerancije na frustraciju i to je zaista nešto o čemu treba da razmišljamo. Da postoji, i to molim vas da kada čitamo vesti, velika razlika je između istraživanja koja su rađena online i istraživanje kao što je ovo. Nemojte uvek da verujete online istraživanjima, pogotovo mi stručnjaci, iz razloga što mi ne znamo da li neko 100 puta popuni isti upitnik, jer to je online istraživanje. Naravno, oni mogu nešto da kaže, ali ne u potpunosti. I ono što je negde važno da zaključimo, prevalenca psihijatrijskih poremećaja u ovom momentu u Srbiji je otprilike 15,2% u drugoj godini pandemije i negde je to u skladu sa onim što je u Evropi između 10 i 19%. Eto, hvala vam puno na pažnji i ukoliko bude pitanja, tu smo. Hvala.
Hvala, Milice. Thank you very much. Jel imamo sad pitanje, Milice? Da. Znači, nastavljamo, a pitanja ćemo sačuvati za kraj simpozijuma. Hvala.
Sada ću da predstavim na srpskom, onda ću je pozvati da govori. Profesorka Manon Hilgers je rukovodilac departmana u Sofia Children Hospital u Erasmusu u Holandiji, živi u Rotterdamu i radi u Rotterdamu. Ona je uključena u različite projekte i različite istraživanja u okviru Evrope. Ona je sada predsjednik kongresa koji će biti organizovan u Maastrichtu, sada već za nešto manje od mesec dana, Evropskog kongresa Evropskog udruženja dečjih adolescentnih psihijatara i ona je evropski predstavnik u okviru AKPP, to je Američka asocijacija za dečju adolescentnu psihijatriju. Dear Manon, once again on behalf of our association and my personal, thank you very much again for coming and thank you for your lecture. So please have a floor. Thank you.
First of all, I want to thank the Serbian Association of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry for inviting me, and especially you, Milica, for all the very nice things that you have already organized for me and for my family. It's really a very good acquaintance with your country. I want to talk to you about a study that we have done in the Netherlands during the COVID period. But first I want to talk some background information regarding mood disorders in general. So these are my disclosures. They're all funding from the Dutch government. So from a background perspective, we know that unipolar depression is a very common mental health problem, especially in adolescents. But we also know that it's often unrecognized and it has a very high one-year prevalence, but also what we see is it's an enormous risk factor for suicide. What we know also is that it has impact on social and also educational impairments, and it is related with increased rates of smoking, substance misuse, and also obesity. And so it's very important that we recognize and treat unipolar mood disorders already early in life. But what we also know is that it has a very high burden of illness. As you can see, although it's a study from 2011, depressive disorders in young people has the highest dailies as you can see here, together also with other psychiatric disorders like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So we did a study looking at the risk factors for depression in adolescents, and what we found is that especially a family history of depression, but also exposure to psychosocial stressors are really important regarding the risk of developing depression in young. And what we found is that if you have a father or mother with a depressive disorder or any other mood disorder, you have a 40% chance of developing it yourself. So it's a really important risk population that we need to identify. So this is a slide which shows some data of a study that I started myself when I was a young PhD student in 1997. It's a study of offspring of parents with bipolar disorder. And what you can see here is at baseline they were having a mean age of 16, and already of 140 offspring there were some severe mood disorders present, but the majority didn't have any problems. And then we had a second, a third and a fourth measurements, and we were able to follow them up for 12 years. And at 12-year follow-up, we did see that more than 50% developed any mood disorder, so a bipolar disorder or a unipolar mood disorder. And we just recently finished a 22-year follow-up, and what we found is that especially the unipolar mood disorder even increased. And in this same cohort, we looked for the impact of life events for specific trauma. And what we saw is that those who developed a mood disorder already had a very high load of life events, and especially also those with a more passive kind of coping style and more avoidant temperament were more prone to develop mood disorders themselves. And it learns us something about the possibility to look for preventive interventions focusing on coping strategies. This is a slide showing data from another Dutch study, which I wanted to show you to illustrate what the time to treatment of mood disorders is. And it shows that it takes approximately 4 years before adolescents who are actually having a mood disorder get the treatment they need. And that's even more for those with a bipolar mood disorder. So what we did is we looked at the population, how we could identify these youngsters at an earlier age, and we were in the possibility to look in a school population, so general population, and we used the cell phones of the young people and offered them an experience sampling modeling method. So you have your cell phone, and in one day you get 5 bleeps, and during these 5 bleeps you need to give some answers on questions on your cell phone. So with these enormous amount of data, we are able to construct mood profiles, and in this general population we were able to identify 3 mood profiles. The first one is the more happy profile, so the adolescent with no problem. The second one is the more typically developing adolescent with positive as well as negative effect. And we have also the more at-risk profile with more negative effect and more at risk for depression. And we validated these experience sampling mood profiles with questionnaires that are validated like the CDI. And it seems as if the ESM is identifying exactly the same population as with validated paper and pencil questionnaires. But of course, the young people really prefer the ESM on their cell phone instead of all these boring paper and pencil questionnaires. So that's something that we kept in mind while we were developing a tool on e-health. This is a slide that shows us that we were really looking for prevention programs for these children and adolescents who have an at-risk status for mood disorder. And what we found is that there are some preventive programs, but they are mostly taking psychoeducation, CBT, and they're mostly not online. So it's not possible to give all these high-risk populations the availability of an online preventive program. Also, they don't want to come to the hospital, of course, because they're only at risk because of their familial load, but not because they have problems by themselves already. So what we did is we developed an e-health tool. It's called the Grow It app. And we wanted to include the experience sampling modeling, but also give an intervention based on CBT. And what we did is we monitor thoughts and emotions in daily life, utilizing the ESM, but also offer daily CBT-based challenges to really change their behavior and their coping strategies. We also work together with adolescents, with gaming experts, to provide motivating gaming elements, and we wanted to really provide this large scale. And here you can see the developing process. It's just too much detail, but just to show you how much work this is to really develop a validated online tool. We already started in 2016. We took small steps with all kinds of iterative learning cycles, including focus group with adolescents. And eventually we developed the Grow It app. And by chance it was ready when the COVID pandemic arrived. So how it works is you build a tree, that's why it's called Grow It. You grow the tree. You do that with a team of 5 to 8 adolescents, and you can earn points. And that's, of course, the gaming elements. And you can earn points by actually giving answers to the mini questionnaires that you can get 5 times a day, and also by completing the challenges that you get. And here you can see how the screen looks like. So you get questions like, how do you feel? Who is your company? Where are you now? And you get a challenge like baking a cake, but also quiz challenges, but also activating challenges like make a picture of a chicken. So you have to go outside, take your bike, go to a farm or something, make a picture of a chicken, and other team members really need to validate that you actually did that, make that picture. It also has a chat function with stickers so that you can chat with your teammates, and it was, of course, officially approved by our medical ethical committee, but also on a security level. We also added, based on the comments of the youngsters, an emotion profile. So after playing for 4 weeks, you get your own emotion profile, which gives you insight in how your emotions have been during these weeks, and also what the effect is of challenges and the effect of being online, being with friends, or being with your family. So we were planning to put this Grow It app into the high-risk populations of familial risk, so offspring of parents with bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, of mood disorders. We were also planning to give this to another high-risk population, chronically ill children. But then the COVID pandemic arrived, and we thought everybody now is at risk, also in the general population. So we got a grant from the Dutch government, and we were able to put this online gaming, Grow It, online, and we had lots of schools that were interested, municipalities around the country, and we were able to include more than 3,000 adolescents between 12 and 26 years of age, and we had a mean age of around 18. And what we saw is we were really curious how the adolescents thought about the Grow It app, and here you can see the results of the feasibility and the user experience. And as you know, adolescents are really critical, so we were happy with the comments that we got and the grades from the adolescents on this app. But also, we were of course curious whether the Grow It app would actually have an intervention effect on mood episodes, but especially also on anxiety and mood problems. And this is, we had 2 cohorts because we had 2 waves of COVID restrictions, and the first cohort in the first lockdown had more than 1,200 participants, the second cohort 1,871. And we were very curious to see what the effects were of these two cohorts. And what we saw is that especially on affective well-being and cognitive well-being, we saw an increase of the well-being of the participants that played it, in as well the first as the second lockdown. And also what we found is that we were really interested in looking at the experience sampling, so the daily well-being. And here we can see we had a website that really had a view on how the adolescents were doing on a daily basis. And here you can see the PA is the positive effect and NA is the negative effect. So we had snapshots of our participants on a daily basis, which was really nice because as you can see here, in this period we had lots of snow in the Netherlands, so everybody went outside and we could immediately see that in the positive effect. And this is the data of the positive and negative effect on a daily basis of those adolescents that played Grow It app. And in green you can see the increase of positive effect in the first and the second cohort, and the decrease of negative effect. And it's what this slide shows is that the green lines is the majority of the cohort, almost 70% with positive effect increase and 80% of a decrease of negative effect. And in purple you can see the group who didn't benefit, and this was a group that already had at the start of playing the Grow It the most depressive and anxious problems. So this is a subgroup in which this more preventive tool is not effective. So I come to my conclusions. We know that adolescents are at high risk for mood disorders. We also know that they do want to share their problems, but they prefer not to talk about it. And we've learned that offering an e-health tool like a Grow It app gives an opportunity to reach an enormous number of adolescents, and it also showed that they really benefit on a daily basis regarding their well-being. Of course, we need to provide more evidence for this. The data is now published and we're going to offer it also to our high-risk cohorts. So with that, I would like to end. I also would like to put some attention to the ESCAP meeting, the conference in Maastricht that we have in June of this year. And of course, I all welcome you to join us to come there. And of course, I want to thank all my colleagues that worked on these studies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manon. I think we will have a questions at the end. So thank you very much. Yes, please. This is very, very interesting application, and there is many of us who are thinking about how to create. So I guess we can communicate and maybe think about some cooperation regarding this, because this is something that we have in idea. So Gordana, it's your pleasure right now.
It is indeed a great pleasure to introduce Professor Dimitris Anagostopoulos, a dear friend and somebody who needs no introduction here today, who you've already heard. But Professor Dimitris is the president of ESCAP at the moment. I've known him in the past in his capacity of chair of the Child and Adolescent Psychiatry section of the World Psychiatric Association, where he presided again over a number of wonderful projects and indeed introduced a number of us to the work on a global level. So Dimitris, over to you. We look forward to hearing on the topic of practicing child psychiatry in the era of global trauma.
The Greek paradigm. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gordana, for your kind words. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, your colleagues in your National Association of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, for this kind invitation. We are much obliged personally and as ESCAP also. Thank you for this excellent program that you have already been on, and I hope that I will not disturb you, let's say, a lot, because I would like to be a little bit more different in the way we proceed with this COVID pandemic issue. Actually, I will not present any kind of data. They are all very easily and free accessible in the Google and PubMed, because I think that we must also take the chance for the pandemic to think about the way we tackle the child psychiatric problems of nowadays. So, in continuing my speech in the beginning of the Congress, I will discuss with you how is to practicing child psychiatry nowadays, which I call the era of global trauma, using the Greek paradigm. Just to summarize what I have said in my introductory speech the first day of the Congress, I want to say that in this era of globalization, mental health is shaped by its key features. Stability of life has been destroyed in all aspects by an acute, direct and indirect violence all over the globe. Principles, values, social status, financial conditions, public health and mental health services, environment have been questioned in a continuous and abrupt way. Consequently, individualization, lack of social coherence, game of power, economic interest over human needs are now values, the new values of life. Thus, a global traumatic situation has been established for almost 4 decades and affected societies and individuals. Nowadays, we face a global trauma characterized by a continuum of crises, started by the economic crisis, followed by the refugee crisis, the health crisis now called pandemic, and finally, the war crisis that came again in Europe. So the traumatic impact of this reality differs according to various continents, countries, and individuals. Nevertheless, new psychopathologies are emerged along with the previous common ones. Today, we struggle to find new effective ways to support the healthy development of our children, adolescents, youth, and families. Child psychiatry must deal with all these new conditions regarding the understanding of mental health problems, along with new forms of preventive and therapeutic interventions. Congratulations, Manon, for this fantastic tool that you show us. It's a very good tool for preventive and treatment at the same time. This is a good example. So, in my brief talk, I'll try to present the Greek experience facing all these crises as a paradigm of how we could perceive, explore, interpret, and finally tackle all these phenomena. Okay, yeah. Let's go back. First, we must say that the original situation we are experiencing for our time, not historically, did not appear out of nowhere. It is a health crisis stemming from our model of life, which in the last decade has brought about a global economic crisis, which is at the same time a political crisis, a crisis of values, and a crisis of the way of life. In recent years, that is especially in my country, we live under a constant state of crisis, which is something which cannot neglect or take apart. It's a serious psychosocial stress all over the people of Greece, and in my mind, all over, in various ways, all over the globe. But I'm speaking for Greece as a paradigm. In mental terms, we would say that we live in a constant mental trauma. Trauma is the Greek word, trauma. Uncertainty and fear for life under socio-economic conditions now reaches the pandemic to become fear for existence itself. In these states of mental trauma, we experience symptoms as all over the Europe. Let me make a parenthesis here. There are fantastic papers in our journal, ECAP journal, in which you could see the results of the ESCAP survey on the effects of pandemic in mental health of children and adolescents, and also the effects and the impact in psychiatric services. And above all, there is an excellent presentation by Professor Johannes Heberbar, our editor of ECAP Journal, in our site, in ESCAP site. So, as I said previously, the first day, please visit our site, visit our, advise our journal. It is easily, freely accessible. You can get a lot of it. That's why I'm not going in details with figures, numbers, and things like that. They are already said and very well said, and I gave some examples where you can find them. So, as I say, in these states of mental trauma, we experience in Greece also symptoms of post-traumatic stress, widespread anxiety and depressive episodes, especially in the most vulnerable developmental groups, which are children, adolescents, and the elderly. Why the elderly? We have a great interest of the physical and mental health of elderly people, not only because they are the majority in my country, but also because they play a key role in the raising of our children. Most of our Greek children are raised by grandparents or grandparents' figures. So, also what we have observed this period of time, and actually, let me say that this is very obvious nowadays. I mean, this last year, there is an explosion of new psychopathology, as we call it. I mean, an explosion of eating disorders, self-destructive behaviors, suicidality, suicides, and above all, a borderline condition who shapes everything. And a key impact is in the formation of identity of adolescents, especially the sexual confusion of their identity, which is a big issue now, and actually is under studying by my national society. We put down a survey for this issue all over the Greece in collaboration with all the child psychiatric service of Greece under the guidance of my national society. This is a very difficult issue to tackle because we have not only we have not the knowledge in depth, but also the services and the way of thinking is still very far from what are the needs of the borderline adolescents. And another very disturbing phenomenon in Greece is because of the dissolution of the frame of our life, of a stable frame of our life. And you know that especially adolescents are in great need of system of values, not only to accept but also to confront in order to be able to formate their identity, which is lacking nowadays. We have a tremendous raise in the numbers of new cases of adolescents who suffer from these new psychopathologies, as I say. It's a very disturbing and very, we are very unquiet with this phenomenon in my country. Let me go again to my paper. But in general, let's say, these conditions make it difficult for children and adolescents to complete their mental development and development as a whole, while in the elderly, they lead to regression and despair, which further aggravate their physical health. Respectively, people with diseases, not only physically but also mentally, are more burdened by the consequences of the pandemic, but also by the measures to deal with it. The availability and accessibility of mental health services has been dramatically reduced, set back. About a month ago, no, more, couple of months ago, the World Health Organization published a study of 150 countries all over the globe, which recorded the negative effects of the pandemic on the provision of mental services, which in any case fell short of the needs globally and in our country. This is a stable trend. In my country, the course of psychiatric reform, which started very early, middle of 80s, and we were quite proud of this psychiatric reform because it was the first one in a large-scale initiative which has been undertaken by the EU at that time. It was actually, from many points of view, a critical initiative for our country and for Europe as a whole at the time. Unfortunately, then, the course of this psychiatric reform, that is the transition from maximum psychiatry, which is synonym of the incarceration, marginalization, and stigmatization of mental illness, to community social psychiatry. And this happens due to the economic crisis initially, and now because of the pandemic. Not only has it stopped, but it continues to show dangerous signs of relapse and setback. It is characteristic that the field of mental health is the first to be limited. Its human and infrastructure resources have been expropriated to meet the system needs now for COVID-19, previously to reduce health costs. At least these are the excuses. Before all, the public health system should have been strengthened as a whole, and the private system should have been put at its service, and not the opposite that we see happening today, at least in my country, and this is because of the political idea of the government has nothing to do with social affairs, with mental health, with everything must be shut down and go to the private sector. And this happened in many ways. I'll explain later on. Became, for example, our hospital for one disease, and all the other patients have to go to the private sector under this terrible situation. And we cannot ignore this as scientists in the name of something like poor science, which not exist in myself. We are obliged to follow Hippocratic trend, Hippocratic paradigm as biopsychosocial scientists. Nothing has really been done about mental health, as I said. what is happening in my country, but also in my mind internationally, is that due to COVID, the hospital units are transformed into hospitals of one disease, with the suspension of all other services, starting from those for mental health. At the moment, now we are discussing this. In Thessaloniki, you know, most of you know Thessaloniki. I'm talking in Serbia. Almost all the community psychiatric services, and among them, and first of all, the CAP services, especially the outpatients units, have returned to the Thessaloniki Psychiatric Hospital, the biggest asylum of North Greece, from where they started. You realize that these are serious setbacks. Normally, the opposite should happen. This, of course, presupposes appropriate primary healthcare units so that we do not all end up in the hospitals. And it is a pity, at least for my country, what is happening now. Because when we came out of the memoranda of this disaster of economic crisis and along with the refugee crisis at the same time, what was happening with our previous government, such steps of reform had started to be taken. Now, before closing my, how much time I have? 3 minutes? Okay. Okay, I'll take 5. Yeah, just 2 issues I would like to raise. The one is the tele in our life. A very good example of how useful tele in our life is already been given by this excellent talk by my colleague Manon. But telemedicine at this conjuncture, like telemedicine in general, can offer help, but it has its limits and can by no means be the only way to care. Technology is at the service of the human-to-human relationship, but it cannot replace it. And here there is a danger, because the idea has begun to develop that everything can be done through these processes: teleeducation, telemedicine, telepsychiatry, telelife in general. Telelife is not life, though. On the other hand, it is very important for a person, for example, who is isolated in the hospital or at home, whether he is ill or not, can see and talk to his people, to his friends, to his family over the smartphone and see each other. It's a very good example. But I'm not against this. I've tried to take attention from the other hand that if we have to follow a trend that leads everything to be done normally there, to be done normally there, yes, through tele-life, we should have taken this lesson from, something missing here, never mind, I'll skip it. I said what I have said to say. Just a few words about death and burning, because at least in my country, we have an enormous, because of the health policy, number of deaths. Over 30,000 people have been died at the moment from coronavirus in my country. It's a huge number for a short period of time. It's something awful. And I don't want to speculate about the health policy, but of the mental impact of it, because many people who enter coronavirus units in isolation die, and die in a very bad conditions. It is not a normal death. Then there is the issue for their people who cannot accompany them neither in sickness nor in death. And this creates a great mental burden, a feeling of weakness, guilt, especially to adolescents and families, anger which can turn to oneself and take on a depressing character, or to the other, blaming even the one who is ill as a defense against the feelings of helplessness and fear. This can happen anyway in mourning, especially when the corresponding customary procedures which exist in all cultures over time that facilitate separation are not performed. Now, however, there is a more general mourning among my people, which has to do with the ongoing crisis that we mentioned above. In a very short time, in a way that suddenly, for most, our lives changed completely, and now with the health crisis, our very existence is threatened. This change that concerns the whole personality of each one, but also the whole model that we live as a society, because it was sudden, did not allow us to process what we lost in every aspect of our life. Physically, mentally, culturally, socially, even in our identity, and create something else with new values closer to the real human needs. So, I'm finishing. This is my motto. Could this conjecture then become an opportunity to reevaluate the pattern of life and human relationship? Or is it easier for the negative emotions and effects of the pandemic to dominate our psyche? It depends on what each of us wants, but also what we want as societies. Do we want to get out of this crisis on terms that we will avoid the next one and improve our lives? Or do we want to go back to the path that led us here? Relationships have so far been based on consumerism, on the outside, a fast food way of life at all levels. The trip to Ithaca, however, requires an authentic route. Now it has been lost, another has been imposed, or at least we are in a great threat to be imposed, on external terms as to our real needs and satisfies. We can see all this again, the stimulus, the tragic stimulus, we have it. So, as I said in the first day of your Congress, we need a new vision of life, above all, to shape us in every aspect of our life, and of course to shape our epistemological approach to our specialty, which is for all of us a choice of life. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dimitris, thank you very much for this thought-provoking and interesting lecture. I think you make us all re-examine some of our moral and ethical values, and you pose some interesting questions for us about where we're going in general. Kao I uvek, profesor Dimitris Anagastopoulos nam postavlja nova moralna i etička pitanja o kojima ćemo nastaviti da razmišljamo. Hvala, Dimitris.
Thank you.
Okay. Sada ćemo, mislila sam da ide Ana na kraju, ali u redu ako ste postavili. Znači, ovo je Ana Prodanović, ona je psihološkinja koja radi u UNICEF-u i neko ko je zadužen za kvalitet istraživanja u okviru UNICEF-a. Ona, nažalost, nije bila u mogućnosti da bude danas sa nama ovde, ali je snimila i vrlo je zanimljivo da čujemo istraživanje o uticaju pandemije COVID-19 na porodice sa decom u Srbiji.
Hello everyone, warm greetings from UNICEF. My name is Ana Prodanović and I'm the Child Rights Monitoring Specialist here in Serbia, and I'm with you today to present the findings of UNICEF's longitudinal research on the effects of the COVID pandemic on families with children in Serbia. I will be presenting in English, whereas the PowerPoint is in Serbian, so please feel free to follow whichever of the two is more suitable for you. To start off with, I'll say that the research happened in 3 waves. The first wave happened in April 2020, while the state of emergency was still on. The second wave happened in June and July of 2020, just after the state of emergency ended. And then we repeated a third wave with the same respondents in March 2021. This was to capture the more longer-term effects. The thematic areas that were covered through the research was the household economy, parenthood and family relationships, health services, social welfare services, education and mental health. The methodology of the research is explained here on this slide. I won't go into it in a lot of detail, but just to say that approximately 80% of the interviews took place through phone and approximately 20% through auto-responding to an online questionnaire. And the first wave managed to cover around just over 1,800 households, and then we had sort of some attrition in the second and third waves, ending with 745 households, as roughly expected, that covered around 1,000 children. So let me start first by saying a little bit about the household economy findings. Generally, the negative effect of the pandemic on household income was somewhat mitigated in this last third wave, but was still present. And there was a reduction in income that can definitely be traced as a result of the pandemic. In 2021, a quarter of all households with children still reported a decreased income compared to before the pandemic. There were also unplanned costs during the pandemic, and they were still registered in 2021 in the third wave in about a quarter of households with children, although their structure had changed since the first wave, and they were now significantly more related to health costs. Spending savings was in 2021 still the main strategy of survival, and it was present in almost 2/3 of all households, a slight increase from the second wave. And in second place, there was also borrowing of money in about a third of households whose income had decreased by 10% or more, which was also slightly higher than in the second wave. The sale of assets as a mechanism of coping was rarely applied in about 33% of cases. If we were to summarize, we could say that economic instability was most felt by poorest households, or those with the lowest monthly income, and particularly those that would not be able to tolerate sudden financial costs. A reduction in income in at least one wave was reported by these households, whereas an increase in income in the third wave is most often reported by households with the highest incomes. So what we could see from the results is somewhat of a further stratification of income in households with children, with those who had less before the pandemic having further less, and those who had more having a bit more. The region of South and East Serbia reports economic difficulties to a greater extent, and this was somewhat expected, but also households from urban settlements report more economic problems than households from rural areas. When we talk about parenthood and family relationships, we can say that parenthood was very difficult during the period of emergency, became slightly more bearable just after the emergency, and then in the third wave we can see that there is a certain difficulty experienced by parents again, almost as high as in the first wave, and in fact exactly the same as in the first wave. So that was a bit of a concern to us when we observed that. When parents were asked about their worries in relation to their child, the parents, 4% of parents responded that they're worried about disagreements in the family. This was around 33% in the second wave and 4% in the first wave. So these worries, these types of worries, are more often mentioned by parents from Belgrade. Otherwise, the main worries are related mostly to health, socializing, and educational needs of children. When we talk about access of children to health, education, and social welfare services, we can say that with regards to health, there is a certain improvement in access to health services after the end of the period of emergency, and in the third wave there is a slight increase compared to the second wave in both health and social services. If we look at all the research waves, the health services were missing most often for the youngest children, 0 to 6, and this was in about a fifth of all cases, whereas for older children they were slightly more accessible. The pandemic did not significantly impact the use of services of private doctors. Approximately 4/5 of children do not use the services of private doctors, but among those who do use them, there was no significant effect of the pandemic on that. When it comes to education, most parents of children 7 to 17 estimated that distance learning had affected a reduction in their child's motivation to learn. And apart from the decrease in motivation, they also think that it impacted the quality of their child's education. When it comes to mental health, for almost a fifth of children, the pandemic had an impact on a worsening of their mental state according to their parents' assessment. So the parents would now rate it as worse than before the pandemic, and this is to a greater extent among children of older ages between 13 and 17 in households with lower income from Belgrade and from other urban areas. To summarize, the negative effects of the pandemic outweigh the positive effects significantly. The strongest negative effects of the pandemic were registered in households from Belgrade when we look at all the indicators overall. The region of South and East Serbia, to a greater extent, reports about economic difficulties, and when looked at from the perspective of all the observed indicators, the pandemic was more impactful on urban rather than rural areas. I thank you very much for your attention and stand ready for any questions. Thank you.
Hvala UNICEF-u i hvala Ani, ovo je stvarno bilo zanimljivo, vrlo nam je bilo važno da se prikaže ovo istraživanje, jer nekako UNICEF uvek nam daje najsveobuhvatniju sliku. A sada mi je veliko zadovoljstvo da predstavim doktora Gorana Vukomanovića. Dr. Goran Vukomanović je veliki prijatelj dece sa problemima mentalnog zdravlja, to prvo moram da kažem, pre nego što kažem, on je čovek koji nikada nije odbio ni jedan pregled svih nas koji smo upućivali decu u Tiršovu i zaista je jedan veliki čovek. On je naravno i veliki stručnjak, on je pedijatar, on je kardiolog, subspecijalista kardiologije i neko ko se bavi sportskom medicinom. On drži veliki broj edukacija kad su u pitanju edukacije vezane za kardiologiju, vezano za sportsku medicinu i ono što je negde važno da vodi jedan projekat koji se zove Zdravo dete, koji govori o edukaciji o zdravlju. Gorane, mnogo ti hvala što si ovde sa nama i ti si sa profesorkom Stojadinović reprezent pedijatara ovde, tako da izvoli.
Hvala tebi, Milice. Meni je veliko zadovoljstvo, zaista. I spremajući se za ovo predavanje, razmišljao sam kako da ovu temu koju mi je Milica zadala uklopim, da stanem u 15 minuta koliko je predviđeno. 20? 12. Da, čuo sam 20. It is great pleasure and privilege to be here with you, and my lecture would be hybrid lecture because I realized 2 days ago that slides should be in English or vice versa, so I will speak in English and Serbian mixture, so thank you and apologize for that. Biti pedijatar u COVID-u je bilo super. COVID jeste blaža bolest. COVID is definitely milder disease in childhood. Mnogo razloga za to postoje. Ja verujem da je unakrsni imunitet dece, ako ne znate, 10 do 15 svih virusa prehlade su koronavirusi. Nisu ovaj COVID, ali su u stvari unakrsni imunitet pomogao deci. Ima tu mnogo drugih stvari, ali je suština kids has less comorbidities, which is included in complications and death in COVID. Mnogo je posljedica. Ja sam izdvojio ove 4 stavke, od kojih ću pomalo da ispričam o svakoj. There is a huge impact on collective immunity in COVID pandemic situation here. We have decreased immunization rate, which is quite a problem here. Increasing or misuse of antibiotics in COVID pandemic is so big problem, and there is a pandemic of obesity among the kids, especially adolescents. And I will speak something about psychosocial devastation from the aspect of pediatric cardiologist. Vi znate da je hronični stres jedan od najgorih patogena za sve bolesti, uključujući imunitet. Mi smo u COVID-u postali imunolozi, ko se nije bavio imunologijom. 2 osnovna dela imuniteta su urođeni i stečeni imunitet. Innate immunity is more than 90% of our immune system. It is very important. Adaptive immunity is very important as well, and COVID affects both of it. Keystones of healthy immunity is healthy nutrition, healthy sleep, and healthy physical activity. Ovo su 3 stuba za koje mi nemamo zamenu. Što se ishrane tiče, ponekad moramo primeniti odgovarajuće suplemente, ali naprosto nismo u situaciji da unesemo sve što nam treba i ne možemo da sintetišemo neke od važnih stvari, o čemu ćemo malo kasnije. 7 years ago, Ministry of Health of Serbia started project fighting against increasing antimicrobial resistance. So we did a great job, including of our nacionalne smjernice za upotrebu antibiotika. This is a book published 3 years ago. And everything was fine, and then COVID ruined our efforts to decrease the misuse of antibiotics. Krivi su pre svega primarni radovi koji su rekli da azitromicin može da pomogne u COVID-u. Vrlo brzo se vidjelo da ta besmislena tvrdnja da jedan antibiotik može da ubije SARS-CoV-2 virus je otišla, ali je ostala prepisivačka praksa. U ovom radu vidite da je apsolutno besmisleno da pišemo antibiotike kod nekomplikovanog COVID-a, ali se nažalost to desilo. This paper is very important. It shows us how antibiotics ruin our immune system. Antibiotici utiču i na stečeni i na primarni imunitet. Jedna od stvari, kad smo radili analizu zašto pedijatri prepisuju mnogo antibiotike, jeste strah da se nešto ne iskomplikuje. Preventive use of antibiotic in viral diseases are completely bad attitude and bad. We know the mechanisms how antibiotics ruins antiviral immunity. Ovo je rad na miševima koji su nam jako slični imunološki, da su klonovima miševa davali antibiotike, a onda ih izložili mišijem gripu. Ovi što su dobili antibiotike, samo 30% je preživjelo. Ovi što nisu dobili antibiotike, 80% je preživjelo. Mi znamo taj mehanizam aktivacije gena, naročito je opasno ako u prvom danu infekcije date antibiotik, jer on direktno zaključava gene koji u stvari aktiviraju primarni, odnosno urođeni imunitet za borbu sa virusima. Dakle, to je potpuno jasno, to su potvrdili i kliničke studije. Druga stresna situacija je bila bolje da damo na vreme da ne zakasnimo. Giving antibiotics in the fear of complications are completely bad attitude as well. Cochrane analiza se bavila sa skoro 4000 pacijenata koji su imali infekcije gornjih respiratornih puteva. Bile su 3 grupe, jedni su dobili antibiotike odmah, drugi posle 2 dana, treći nisu dobili antibiotike. Procenjivan je complication rate, dakle koliko je to različito, nema razlike. Da li odmah antibiotik od virusne infekcije ili posle 2 dana ili nikad ne dati, nema razlike u komplikacijama. Dakle, ne smemo da prepisujemo antibiotike kod virusnih infekcija koje nisu komplikovane. Microbiome is very important for our immunity. We are building our microbiome in first 2 or 3 years of life. So diversity is very important. Raznolikost naše mikroflore je užasno važna za imunitet. Samo 7 dana oralnog antibiotika počisti diverzitet naše mikroflore tako da nam je potrebno do 2 godine da napravimo ponovo to isto što gradimo od samog rođenja. To je jako važno. Mnogo je studija koje su pokazale da rana upotreba antibiotika radi ovo. If we use antibiotics in 2 or 3 years of life, they're increasing probability of getting allergic, autoimmune and metabolic diseases. Unfortunately, this is true. Ovo su 2 rada iz prošle godine i ove godine koji su pokazali da antibiotici utiču na vakcinalni odgovor kod dece. Ovaj drugi koji vidite objavljen je pre 20 dana, pokazalo se da davanje antibiotika u prve 2 godine slabi vakcinalni imunitet kod dece. Dakle, potpuno jasno dokazano ovo o čemu pričamo. Ako bi uporedili imunološki aspekt sa elegancijom ženskih torbi, ova slika više govori nego što bi čak i ja koji se ne razumemo u ženske torbe vidim razliku. Comparing immunological aspect of giving antibiotics of elegancy of bags for this. So, unfortunately, they're increasing risk of obesity. Dakle, davanje antibiotika samo po sebi, a mi imamo pandemiju gojaznosti. CDC declared that the obesity rate increased double among the adolescents in US. I kad pogledate najveći faktor rizika i u našoj studiji u COVID-u, koju sad nisam htio da vam prezentujem, ali nema vremena, i u svetskim studijama, znate koji je najveći faktor rizika za komplikaciju kod dece? Gojaznost. Definitivno. Masno tkivo je endokrini organ. Fat tissue is endocrine organ, secreting adipokines. Adipokini su citokini, dakle veoma važni faktori za naš imunitet i za naše zdravlje. Sem adipokina koji je prvi i najbolji, koji je protektor našeg tela, a njega gojazni imaju manje, svi ostali nabrojani citokini su proinflamatori, izazivaju hroničnu inflamaciju, a samim tim izazivaju sve ovo što vidite na slajdu, komplikacije koje su užasne. Zato su gojazni više umirali i u COVID-u, ali i bez COVID-a je katastrofalna situacija. Bogalasa study published 15 years ago showed us that if child is obese at the age of 13 or 14, it's going to be obese adult. 80, ako je to na percentilu koji vidite, 84%. Ako su patološki gojazni, bit će sigurno gojazni odrasli. Obesity is recognized as a disease in 2013 by American Academy of Pediatrics. Obesity is malignant disease. Untreated, it is malignant disease, affects all major parts of our body, including mental health as well, you know, better than me. Ako mene pitate, gojaznost je bolest zavisnosti, gde je ono od čega smo zavisni jeftino, dostupno, i legalno. Manjak mikronutrijenata. Svi smo se navikli da imamo vitamin D, vitamin C i, kako se kaže, cink u ovoj epidemiji, ali to nisu osnovni mikronutrijenti, ima ih mnogo više. Micronutrition deficiency in COVID pandemic is very important issue, and we call that nutrition gap. Deca imaju mnogo veće potrebe za mikronutrijentima, a imaju manje rezerve nego odrasli. I ono što vidite kad je neko bez razloga umoran, bezvoljan, češće bolestan, duže oboljeva, to je nešto što je ovo o čemu pričamo. Neurotoxic triad is very important for pediatricians as well. Ovo mi znamo da su ova tri komponente najbitnije. Uticaj deficita mikronutrijenata pokazan u ovom radu fenomenalno. Stres, naravno, prolongirani, kronični, koji je bio u COVID-u, je jedan od glavnih patogenetskih faktora, ali vitamini B kompleksa koji su pomalo zaboravljeni, vitamin B2 and B6 are very important for the health of our nervous system. Oni su direktni čuvari nervnog sistema. Ako pogledamo eksekciju glutamata, koji je u stvari glavni medijator ekscitotoksičnosti, vitamini B koji vidite ovde smanjuju njegovo oslobađanje iz presinaptičke vezikule, ubrzavaju njegov metabolizam i transformaciju u gama-aminobuternu kiselinu. Dakle, jako važni. Ovo je rad koji ćete vi da pročitate sa mnogo više razumevanja nego ja, ali mene je dirnuo, zato što je pokazao da jedna intervencija jednom grupom mikronutrijenata može pomoći kod dece sa ozbiljnim problemima, razvojnim poremećajima, uključujući i popravljanje intelektualnog deficita koji je neverovatan. Dakle, ne lekovi, najmanje 3 meseca su dobijali ove mikronutrijenate, odlično su ih podneli, ali ćete detalje vidjeti vi mnogo bolje razumeti nego ja. Psychosocial devastation, we can see that as pediatricians in our emergency department. Ovo je adolescent 14 years old. She is suffering from 4 types of symptoms and signs for more than 2 years. I ona je upućena u hitnu službu naše klinike pre 7 dana. Imala je precordial pains, kao što vidite, lokalizovano svuda, sve liči na infarkt, a nema veze s infarktom. Imala je palpitation, heart beating, kao što vidite, uglavnom iz čista mira ili vezano za bolove, retko u naporu. Ono što mi najviše volimo u kardiologiji da kažemo nema simptoma i znakova malog udarnog umora. Kad vam lupa srce, a vi nemate drhtavicu, bledilo, ne vrti vam se u glavi, to skoro sigurno nije bitno. Skoro sigurno. And she has dyspnea and shaking and paresthesias all over the body. Ovo su simptomi koje nema već unazad 2 godine i nema dijagnozu. 9 puta je bila u hitnim službama različitim, na kraju je primljena na kardiološko odeljenje. We did all the check-up as a hired doctors, so everything was fine, including ECG in the episode of chest pain, normal completely. On Holter monitoring, we found the palpitations are sinus tachycardia, the normal one. I na testu opterećenja je ona pokazala da osjeća kada se zatrči da je srce lupa, u stvari se radi o normalnom, brzom srčanom radu u sklopu fizičke aktivnosti. For you, the diagnosis is established as well. Vi to znate mnogo bolje, ali panični napadi su kod nas zaista porasli. Mi pokušali smo da napravimo analizu za ovaj kongres, ali je problem bio u tome što smo imali jedno vreme zabranu prijema, osim najhitnijih slučajeva, ali ćemo privesti to i obavestit ću vas prvom sledećom prilikom. Mi smo u hitnoj službi definitivno primetili da otprilike 30 do 60% više dece dolazi sa ovim tegobama nego pre. So, we need multidisciplinary approach. Ova devojčica je viđena od našeg Vukašina, trebeljice psihologa, mi imamo jako dobru psihološku službu. Ona je otišla kući posle 2 dana bolnice, vrlo raspoložena, svesna da nije bolesna. Vukašin je procenio da ne treba psihijatri da se uključuju u ovom trenutku, ali ćemo je pratiti, što je dobro. Online education and online health issues are good part of the COVID. So mi smo uspeli da napravimo jednu priču koju ćemo nekom drugom prilikom da pričamo. Ali the major step ahead, the major advance is mRNA technology. Tehnologija informacione RNK vakcinacije je savladala sve prepreke. Ova bolest je nova bolest po mnogim aspektima, nova vakcina je stavila pod kontrolu, ali informacione RNK tehnologija nije samo za vakcine. Ona će doneti veliki pomak u terapiji kancera i autoimunskih bolesti. Umjesto da dobijate monoklonska antitela koja su napravljena u fabrici, vaše telo će proizvoditi taj protein u glupom mišiću nadlaktice vrlo brzo, gotovo. So, this is my family, and we are all vaccinated. I think that we need to be example for the others, fighting against anti-vaccine lobby, which is unfortunately very strong in Serbia. Sva moja deca i mi i moja unuka Anika su dobili sve vakcine, uključujući mRNA tehnologiju. Hvala vam pažnju.
Hvala puno, Gorane, što si izdvojio vremena. On trenutno obavlja i funkciju pomoćnika direktora Tiršove, a znate da se diže Tiršova 2, tako da je u priličnom poslu. Sada pozivam našu staru drugaricu i prijateljicu godinama koja sarađuje sa DEAPS-om, koja je svih ovih godina omogućavala da imamo kolege iz inostranstva i imali smo sjajne predavače. Neko ko je pomogao, evo sad smo izdali terapijske smernice, ja moram da kažem da zahvaljujući Goci Milović pre jedno 12-13 godina mi smo dobili top predavača, profesor Eric Taylor, svi koji učimo znamo, on je došao zahvaljujući Gordani. Tako da, Gordana, svih ovih godina hvala ti što nas podržavaš i hvala ti što si danas sa nama. Gordana će sada da bude diskutant ove naše sesije i time ćemo završiti i nastavljamo odmah dalje po programu. Evo, Gordana, izvoli.
Hvala velika, Milica, hvala na ovim divnim rečima. Koliko imamo vremena, Milice? Da znamo, 3 do 5 minuta. Htjela sam kao prvo da se zahvalim našim predavačima na ovim izuzetno stimulativnim i interesantnim predavanjima. Imali smo 2 izuzetno kvalitetne epidemiološke studije i kao što je Milica navela, prvi put imamo jedan presek mentalnog zdravlja i kod dece i kod odraslih. I to će biti jedna odlična tačka od koje možemo početi i nastaviti sa daljim merenjima i ispitivanjima. Zatim, naravno, imamo inovacije od naše koleginice Manon Hilgers iz Holandije, gde vidimo kako uspostavljamo nove metode u intervenciji i najvažnije prevenciji depresija koje i dalje prednjače kao morbiditet kod adolescenata i kod dece. I naravno onda prelazimo na ovu drugu UNICEF studiju i epidemiologiju. Interesantno je da imamo na neki način malo kontradiktorne nalaze tu. Imamo u UNICEF studiji ipak veliki uticaj pandemije i COVID-19 na zdravlje, mentalno zdravlje dece i adolescenata, naravno u različitim regionima Srbije, a opet u vašoj studiji, Milice, to nije bilo toliko izraženo i to bi bilo interesantno da se vratimo na to. I samo da se na kraju, pre nego što otvorim podijum, zahvalim ovom multidisciplinarnom doprinosu od našeg profesora i kolege pedijatra. Ovo je kao dah svežeg ovako jedan i mislim da nas podsjeća koliko je važno da decu shvatamo u jednom holističkom smislu, u jednom kompletnom smislu i naravno da razbijamo ove mitove i konspiracije o tome kako lečiti, šta lečiti. I hvala vam na studijama, profesore, i na najnovijim dostignućima i poruke su vrlo jasne. danas i neću da ih ponavljam ovde. Mislim da ste vi to vrlo adekvatno i ubedljivo dočarali nam. Milice, ako možeš da počneš.
Znači, postoji veoma velika metodološka razlika između toga kako smo radili mi istraživanje i kako je radio UNICEF. I to je ono što mislim da je veoma važno da razmišljamo o tome. Znači, mi smo podatke dobili tako što smo ulazili u domaćinstva i sa ljudima radili mini klinički intervju koji traje između 30 i 55 minuta sa svakom osobom, ispitivajući 12 najčešćih mentalnih poremećaja sa vrlo preciznom. To je Šihanov intervju i to je, da kažem, ozbiljan klinički intervju. Pitanja UNICEF-a su rađena na nivou da li imate probleme mentalnog zdravlja i da li imate nekakve probleme. Znači, nije klinički intervju, to je druga vrsta intervjua i mnogo je važno da pravimo jasnu razliku između kliničkih intervjua i anketa. Naravno, ankete su veoma važne i mogu da nam mnoge stvari ukaže i da utiču na naše politike i veoma je bitno da imamo informisanost. Ali molila bih da sa ovog kongresa ide poruka, prosto je nemoguće da je 50% mladih, a to se u medijama pisalo, depresivno u toku pandemije. A to su bile podaci koje smo mi dobili iz nekih, da kažem, anketa koje su rađene. Tako da je razlika u metodologiji i to je razlika što daje ovakva dva rezultata. I još jedna razlika, UNICEF je radio ispitivajući roditelje o mentalnom zdravlju njihove dece, a naša studija je zato i rađena od 18 godina pa nadalje, jer smo direktno s ljudima pričali o njihovim mentalnim problemima.
Hvala, Milice. Ja vas pozivam da komentarišete ili da postavite neko pitanje u vezi ovoga što smo danas čuli. So I'm inviting the audience to ask any questions.
Ukoliko ne, on behalf of organizers, once again, thank you for our guests. They come, they prepare their lectures, and it was really great honor for us to have you here, my friends. Završavamo ovu sesiju i nastavljamo odmah dalje. Ovo je prvi put na našem DEAPS-u, će biti simpozijum posvećen kliničkim vinjetama. To je nešto što smo videli na ESCAP-ovim kongresima i predložili smo da veoma mlade kolege na početku svojih karijera prikažu svoje iskustva u kliničkim vinjetama. Tako da izvolite radno predsjedništvo, nastavljamo odmah. Pozivam sve takođe na izbornu skupštinu koja će, pošto se završi ova sesija, biti pauza, a nakon toga imat ćemo izbornu skupštinu u maloj sali, odnosno u poster sali gde su juče bili posteri. Tako da vas pozivam, izborna skupština je veoma važna za naš rad. Izvolite, Duško i Minja, vaš je podijum da nastavljamo dalje.